This is Seth, and I'm so grateful you've joined me tonight. Before we begin, take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. You've arrived at a sacred threshold, not just of a story, but of peace. Tonight, I will guide you through the final chapter of the sacred temple of Socrates. But don't be worried by the word final. This isn't an ending. It's a return to the part of you that doesn't rush, that doesn't strive, that doesn't carry anything but breath and wonder. We'll journey back to Calliope, a hidden village where fig trees remember your name, where the stars lean in close, and where silence isn't empty, but full of presence. This story is soft, unhurried, gentle. It's made to hold you as you fall asleep. So let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts melt like evening fog. You don't have to do anything now, not even listen too carefully. Just let the rhythm of my voice guide you gently, like a candle's glow through a quiet hallway. This is your time to rest. And as I, Seth, walk beside you tonight through this final door, may you remember, you are not lost, you are not broken, you are already home. Let's begin, and dream well. In a quiet corner of the world where the wind hummed lullabies to olive leaves and time itself seemed to sway like a pendulum in meditation, there existed a village that was not on any map. It wasn't hidden, not exactly, but it remained untouched, like a page no one dared turn. The villagers called it Calliope, which, in the old tongue, meant the place where thoughts fall asleep. Calliope was wrapped in vines and wildflowers, and each house was built with round stones and soft, curved walls that made even shadows feel safe. Here, the stars came closer than anywhere else, and the moon often lingered a little longer in the mornings, reluctant to leave such a tender place. At the heart of this village was a garden, not the kind made of neat rows and labeled plants, but a tangled, whispering wild of herbs, fig trees, and ancient olive groves that seemed older than the earth itself. And in the center of this garden stood an olive tree broader than 10 men with outstretched arms. Its bark curled like the pages of forgotten books, and its roots formed the shape of a seat as if inviting the weary to rest and listen. But what most villagers did not know, perhaps because they never thought to ask, is that beneath this olive tree was a door, not made of wood or metal, but of silence. You could not open it with hands, nor could you find it by looking. It revealed itself only when your thoughts became gentle, and your breath forgot to chase anything at all. Children sometimes spoke of it in hushed voices, of strange dreams that felt like memories, and voices that echoed in their hearts but not their ears. The elders simply smiled, as if remembering something they once knew but had long let go of. Only one person in Calliope knew how to find the door every time. Her name was Liana. Liana was a young woman with quiet steps and patient eyes. She lived in a little stone house just beside the garden, and spent her days drying lavender, reading old scrolls and whispering poems to bees. No one knew where she had come from, not even Liana herself. She had arrived as a child during a night of strange stars and warm rain, tucked inside a basket of woven reeds, her name stitched into the cloth wrapped around her. The villagers had taken her in without question, as was the way of Calliope. And so she grew among them, softly, thoughtfully, like mist rising over still waters. But every evening, after the sun had kissed the hills goodnight, Liana would slip into the garden barefoot, wearing a shawl woven from threads the color of moonlight. She would sit beneath the great olive tree, close her eyes, and wait, not for something to happen, but for everything else to stop happening. Then the silence would come, not the empty kind, but the full kind, the kind that hummed with presence and peace. And when it did, the bark of the olive tree would ripple like water, and the door would appear as if it had always been there, waiting for someone who remembered how to see. Liana would step through, and on the other side was the temple. It was not a building in the way we know buildings. It had no walls, no ceiling, no floor, at least not made from stone or timber. Instead, it was built from memory and meaning, a sacred space made of thought, dream, and echo. Pillars of mist curved into spirals that held up a sky of violet dusk. The ground was soft like wool, but shimmered like river stones, and the air tasted like rosemary and rain. At the center of the temple sat a figure carved from light and shadow, an old man whose face was always both familiar and forgotten. He never spoke first. He waited. For the temple of Socrates was a place not for answers, but for the right questions. And every night, Liana brought one. She had done so since she was 10 years old, when the door had first appeared to her during a quiet moment when she had been crying beneath the tree. Not from sadness, but from the strange ache of wondering. That night she had asked, "Why do stars burn, just to be seen by eyes that will one day close forever?" And the figure had looked at her, not with eyes, but with a kind of seeing that felt like warmth wrapping around your soul. Then he had replied, "Because beauty does not need to last to be worth loving." Since then, the temple had become her secret classroom, her sanctuary, her never-ending book. She asked about sorrow and laughter, about silence and song, about why people forget what they swore they would always remember. And every answer came like a gentle stream flowing over smooth stones, not to change the shape of the world, but to soften the heart that walked it. This evening, Liana brought with her a new question. She stepped into the garden just as the sun folded itself behind the hills, and the sky began to hush. Crickets played their slow, sleepy tunes, and the olive leaves shimmered silver in the breeze. She sat beneath the tree, exhaled slowly, and let her mind become still. The door opened like a breath. Inside the temple, the old man, Socrates, or perhaps something older than Socrates, sat in his usual place upon the nothingness that held everything. Liana bowed. "I have a question," she whispered. The old man nodded. She sat cross-legged on the soft, shimmering ground and looked around the endless sky walls that surrounded them. Tonight, the stars were particularly bright. A misty owl flew by without sound, and far off the chime of a bell rang, though there were no bells to be seen. "Why do I feel like I've been here before, even before I was born?" The old man smiled. "You have," he said. And that was all. But in the temple, that was enough. For the answer wasn't meant to end the question. It was meant to deepen it. Liana closed her eyes and let the reply move through her like waves, unhurried, unresolved, beautiful. "You once told me," she said softly, "that the soul is not a container but a garden, that wisdom is not something we collect, but something we tend. Is that still true, even when the world feels heavy?" The old man's voice came like a candle lit in a dark room. "Especially then." Liana breathed in, and with each breath the temple seemed to grow, not larger, but deeper. She could feel rooms behind rooms, halls of thought branching out like roots from the center of a great tree. Each corridor was a question. Each doorway was a moment in time waiting to be remembered, or perhaps reimagined. Tonight, she decided to explore. She walked toward one of the shimmering archways that had appeared at the edge of the temple's light. As she approached, the arch took form, made of intertwined vines, parchment, and stardust. And as she stepped through it, she found herself not in another place, but another moment. A long table sat beneath a pergola of jasmine vines. Seated around it were philosophers, not just those of marble statues and old scrolls, but faces from every age. A young boy, no older than 7, asked questions about why people dream of flying. An old woman with silver braids asked if silence could be louder than speech. A man with dusty boots asked if courage always needed fear to prove itself. And they listened to one another. No one interrupted. No one corrected. They shared and pondered and allowed each idea to bloom like flowers in the sun. Liana watched, smiling, her heart full and still. When she returned to the center of the temple, the old man was waiting. "Was that real?" she asked. He looked at her with that timeless gaze. "Everything that opens the heart is real." She sat beside him for a long while. Time, here, moved like a river under moonlight. Steady, unmeasured, kind. Eventually, she asked one more question for the night. "What is the purpose of all this?" Her voice was quiet, as if afraid the question itself was too heavy to be cradled by peace. The old man's answer came like a lullaby. "To wonder gently is the purpose." And with that, Liana smiled. She stood, bowed again, and the temple began to dissolve. Not vanish, but fold softly back into the place where dreams sleep. When she stepped back into the garden of Calliope, the night was still young. The stars blinked kindly, and the olive tree rustled like it was remembering a secret it had once told the wind. Liana walked back to her little stone house. She lit a candle, poured a cup of warm anise tea, and sat by her window. She did not write down the answers. She never did. Some truths were meant to live only in the silence between thoughts. And so she drifted into sleep, even as the temple waited quietly beneath the olive tree, ready for the next question, the next visitor, the next gentle wonder. For the sacred temple of Socrates was endless. It had no final door, no last thought. It existed only to hold the questions we forget to ask when we are awake. And tonight, somewhere in the world, someone else had just begun to wonder. The wind whispered that night in a voice no louder than breath, curling through the stone paths of Calliope, as if it too were trying not to disturb the sleeping world. But Liana was not yet asleep. Though her eyes were closed and her body was still, she hovered somewhere between dreaming and waking, a place where thoughts softened and the soul became light enough to listen. Inside her, the question echoed gently. If time moves forward, why do memories pull us back? The temple did not summon her this time. She summoned it, not with intention or will, but with surrender. And the olive tree, sensing the change, shifted slightly. Its roots warmed and the air around it thickened like honey. A faint shimmer, no brighter than starlight on a stream, unfolded at its base. The door of silence opened without a sound. Liana walked barefoot through the silver grass of the garden, her shawl trailing behind her like a shadow that had learned to dream. When she reached the tree, she didn't pause. She simply stepped in. Inside, the temple was stillness. Tonight, the air felt even more alive, as if it held breath for every creature that had ever asked why. The stars above the temple spun slowly, like stories dancing in a circle. And at the center, the old man waited, his shape neither solid nor smoke, but something between. His hands rested on his knees, and his eyes, though they had no color, held galaxies in their silence. Liana sat across from him. Tonight, she did not speak first. Instead, she listened. Not to sounds, but to presence. The kind of listening that happens only when the noise within has softened. The temple began to hum. It was not a song. It was not music. It was a feeling that moved like a sound might, curling through the air, stroking the skin, entering the spaces between thoughts. She felt her question dissolve. Not forgotten, just released, like a bird that no longer needed a cage. And in its place came a memory. Not from this life, from another. She saw herself, a little girl walking through a great library. The shelves reached beyond sight, filled not with books but with glowing spheres, each one pulsing softly like a sleeping heart. She touched one, and it burst into color. Scenes unfolded. A mountain temple, a bowl of light, a voice that was her own but older, deeper. Do not try to hold truth, the voice whispered in the memory. It is like water. It refreshes only when allowed to flow. The scene faded. The temple returned. She looked at the old man. I remember something, she said quietly. He nodded. You always do. She tilted her head. Why can't I remember everything at once? Because your soul is a garden, not a scroll. Each memory is a seed. It blossoms when it is ready. She smiled at that. It made her feel safe. No pressure to be perfect. No demand to understand all at once. She looked around. The temple had shifted again. Now there were doorways, many of them. Some were made of woven mist, others of vines, and one seemed to be carved from the sound of laughter itself. Can I choose one? She asked. The old man gestured gently. She stood, approaching a doorway framed by ivy and the scent of jasmine. As she stepped through, the world folded around her like a gentle breeze curling into a new shape. She found herself standing at the edge of a lake made of glass. The water did not move. The sky above was lavender, and the horizon curved softly as if the whole world had learned to exhale. A figure stood by the shore. Not the old man. Someone else. He was tall, with kind eyes, and his robe shimmered like it was made from pages of forgotten poems. His voice, when it came, was calm. You came to remember, he said. I think so, Liana replied. You always do, in the end. She looked into the lake. The reflections did not show the sky. They showed moments, moments of lives lived and lives imagined. In one, she was a healer in a village made of song. In another, she was a wanderer on a path of stars. In yet another, she was no one at all, just a presence in the wind that whispered stories into sleeping children's dreams. Are these me? She asked. He nodded. They are echoes of who you've been, and whispers of who you still might become. But why show me now? Because you are beginning to ask the deeper question. She turned to him. What question is that? The one that has no words. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. So full it overflowed from her eyes as tears she didn't understand, but didn't need to. The man smiled and stepped back. The lake dissolved into mist, and the temple returned once more. Liana sat down. The old man was waiting, patient as always. "I don't think I need answers anymore," she said. He tilted his head. "I think I just want to listen to everything." "That," he said, "is when the true conversation begins." She closed her eyes. Around her, the temple changed again, not in shape, but in spirit. It grew quiet, but not still. She could feel movement, like threads being woven, thoughts being stirred. She stood up and walked along a path that had not been there a moment before. Each step sounded like rain touching leaves. The path led to a circle of stones that glowed faintly with symbols. As she approached, they shimmered with recognition. These were not stones of power. They were stones of memory. She knelt beside one. As her fingers brushed its surface, a scene opened inside her mind. She was sitting beside a fire with an old woman who stirred a pot of something fragrant and sweet. The woman said, "When your heart feels heavy, hold it like a child who is tired, not broken." The vision faded. Another stone, another moment. She was standing beneath stars with a man who drew constellations in the sky with his finger. "The stars are not above us," he said. "They are within us, mirrored in the stillness of knowing." Another, a child leading her through a field of wildflowers. "Every step is a question," the child said. "Every breath is an answer waiting to be sung." Liana sat among the stones for a long time. They asked nothing of her. They gave everything gently. Eventually, she stood and made her way back to the old man. He watched her quietly, his presence a steady warmth. "Why does this place change every time I visit?" she asked. "Because you change every time you ask." She nodded. "I feel like I'm not walking through the temple. I feel like the temple is walking through me." His smile was so faint it almost wasn't there. "But it's always waiting," she added, "because it was never built to leave." She thought about that. A place that lived inside you. A place of silence, of wonder, of questions that were more precious than answers. She looked at her hands. They glowed slightly, as if brushed by starlight. She realized she had never been alone here. Not once. Even when she came with sadness. Even when she brought questions wrapped in fear. The temple never rejected her. It simply opened. "I wish others could come," she whispered. "They do," he said. "Who?" "Anyone who remembers how to be still." She looked around once more. The stars had moved again, slower than time, quicker than dreams, and she knew that far beyond the visible temple, others were sitting in their own sacred spaces, asking their own sacred questions. Perhaps a child in another village, a shepherd beneath a sky of foreign stars, a monk in the last hour of night, a mother listening to her sleeping child's breath, a soul in search of its name, all part of the same endless temple, all asking not to know, but to feel. And so Liana stood, her heart quiet, her mind soft, her soul awake. She walked once more to the olive tree's door and stepped through. Outside, the garden was still bathed in moonlight. The air was scented with sage and soft rain. Crickets sang lullabies to the earth, and the world waited without urgency. She walked slowly home, her shawl trailing behind her like a memory that hadn't yet happened. She lit a candle. She wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. The temple would remember, and it would be there again tomorrow, and the day after, and the night after that, waiting, endlessly, quietly, lovingly, always. The morning in Calliope came gently, as it always did. There were no loud birds, no shouting roosters, no sudden bursts of sun. Instead, the light arrived in slow waves, like soft hands drawing back the curtain of night. The dew glistened on the wild thyme and mint that curled between the cobblestones. The olive trees whispered to one another with leaves that shimmered like ancient secrets, and the sky wore its softest blue, as if dressed for meditation. Liana rose before the sun touched the tops of the houses. She did not yawn or stretch or even sigh. She simply sat up, as if her body were responding to an invitation only the soul could hear. She wrapped herself in her shawl, the one woven of moon thread and wind song, and stepped outside barefoot. Her feet knew the garden well, even in sleep, and they carried her without thought to the place where the sacred silence lived. The olive tree stood still, but something about it felt expectant. Liana did not sit this time. She placed both her hands upon the tree's great bark, closed her eyes, and listened, not with ears, but with her breath. And when the silence came, not the absence of noise, but the presence of peace, the bark shifted, not with sound, but with softness. The door appeared, rippling like reflection on still water. She stepped through, and tonight the temple was wind. She did not walk into a room nor stand upon a floor. She entered motion, endless, circular, yet calm. The wind did not tug or rush. It wrapped around her like a question waiting to be spoken. She felt no fear, no urgency, only wonder. And then, slowly, the motion began to shape itself. The swirling currents formed columns of light. Pathways opened like ribbons unfurling in the air. The temple reassembled itself, not of stone or wood, but of presence and memory. The old man was there. But tonight, he was not seated. He stood on a platform of quiet light, his hands held open at his sides. The space around him pulsed gently, as though even silence had a heartbeat. Liana approached. "I didn't bring a question this time," she said softly. "You brought yourself," he replied. "That is enough." She stood beside him. Together, they looked out over the endless flowing patterns of the temple's heart. Shapes moved, not people, but possibilities. Forms made of thought, whispers becoming color, patterns of lives yet to be lived. "It looks like a dance," she said. "It is. The dance between knowing and not knowing." She watched as two threads crossed, spiraled around one another, then gently parted again. "Why do they separate?" she asked. "Because unity without freedom is not unity at all." She didn't fully understand, but her heart did. That was always enough in the temple. The wind stilled slightly. A soft path formed beneath her feet, glowing faintly with symbols that changed as she walked. Each step brought a word to mind. Remember, release, return, become. She followed the path without thinking, until she reached a door made of nothing but breath. She stepped through. On the other side, the temple changed again. Now she was in a circular chamber lit by gentle fireflies. Around her were pools, small, shallow, clear. Each pool shimmered with a different hue, one green like morning leaves, another blue like twilight, another golden as dreams yet unborn. The old man appeared beside her, not by walking, but by becoming. He gestured toward the pools. "Memories," he said. "Not yours, not anyone's, just memories that wander, waiting to be remembered." She knelt beside the golden pool. Within it, she saw a figure sitting beside a riverbank, a woman. She was humming a song in a language Liana didn't know, but still recognized. The woman was weaving something from long strands of grass. She worked slowly, her movements calm, her breath steady. And as Liana watched, she felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Recognition, a kind of love without object. The vision faded. She turned to the blue pool. It showed a child running barefoot through snow, laughing so freely that the sky itself seemed to smile. The child stopped suddenly, looked up and whispered, "I remember the stars." The image dissolved. Liana sat back, overwhelmed not by weight, but by depth. She looked at the old man. "What are these memories for?" "For everyone," he replied. "They are not possessions. They are invitations." To what? To feel what it means to be alive, without the fear of needing to understand it. She lay down beside the pools. The stars above this chamber began to move in spirals. A soft song filled the air, not made by voices, but by listening. The temple listened to her breath. The pools listened to her silence. The old man sat beside her and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to be. After a while, she stood. "I want to walk further," she said. "Then walk with the wind," he replied. A gentle breeze wrapped around her again, lifting her gently until her feet no longer touched the ground. She floated, not upward, but inward, deeper into the temple's dreaming heart. She passed through a corridor where walls whispered stories in tongues long lost to time. One tale caught her ear. It spoke of a boy who once swallowed the sun and carried its warmth inside him, healing others not with touch, but with presence. Another tale sang of a woman who planted stars in her garden, watering them with lullabies. She let the stories brush her like feathers, soft and fleeting. Eventually, she came to a clearing. A round, open space surrounded by trees made not of wood, but of thought. Their leaves shimmered with ideas, their branches curved with philosophy. And in the center, a great stone table sat, etched with questions. Some were simple. What is kindness? Some were strange. Can a tear fall upward? Some were vast. Where does time go when it rests? Liana sat at the table. She didn't try to answer. She just read. And as she read, each question blossomed within her, like seeds unfolding not into knowledge, but into peace. The old man appeared again, this time younger, as if the temple itself had decided to show her a different form. He sat across from her, resting his chin on his hands. "Do you still think answers are what you seek?" he asked. She shook her head. I think I came here to feel less afraid of not knowing." He smiled. "And in that, you've found more truth than most who claim certainty." They sat together as timeless as dusk. Eventually, she asked, "Is this place always the same?" "No," he said. "It becomes what you need, when you stop needing it to be anything." She looked up. The sky above them changed. It became the roof of a house she remembered from a dream long ago. A small cottage with a hearth, a wooden spoon on a table, and the smell of cinnamon and rosemary in the air. She smiled. "That was the dream I had when I was 8. "Yes," he said. "The temple remembers with you." She stood and walked toward the edge of the clearing. There was another path now, shaped like a spiral. She followed it without fear, and with each step, the temple softened, like a hand being gently withdrawn. She arrived again at the door of silence. The old man stood behind her, still and kind. "You will return?" he asked. "Always," she replied. She stepped through. Outside, Calliope had entered twilight. The villagers were lighting lamps shaped like moons, hanging them gently on porches and windowsills. The scent of spiced bread floated through the air, and soft music played somewhere in the distance, made by hands that remembered joy. Liana walked home. She brewed tea, fennel and clove with a touch of wild honey. She wrapped herself in a blanket the color of sea foam and sat by the window. And though her eyes closed and her breathing slowed, her spirit stayed awake just a little longer, listening for the temple's whisper, waiting for the next quiet question to rise like mist. And in the temple, beyond time and thought, a door remained open. Not for visitors, but for wonder. The moon hovered low over Calliope like a lantern cradled in the hand of a dreaming sky. Its silver light pooled quietly on rooftops and slipped into windows as if searching for sleepers who still believed in magic. Cicadas sang slowly in the hedgerows, and from somewhere deep in the village, the soft creak of an old rocking chair kept rhythm with the night. Liana lay awake, not with restlessness, but with stillness so complete that even her heartbeat felt like a part of the hush around her. She didn't rise at once. She waited. For in Calliope, some doors opened only when the soul was quieter than breath. And tonight, she did not need to walk to the olive tree. It came to her. Or rather, something opened within her, and she found herself already beneath it, though her body still rested under her soft woolen blanket, a candle flickering beside her bed. Within her, the temple awakened. She felt it before she saw it, like standing in a room that was also a memory, a space too large to measure, yet small enough to hold in the palm of one's spirit. She was standing in a hallway of archways. Each arch was made not of stone, but of moments, translucent, pulsing, alive. As she walked, the archways responded. Some shimmered, others sighed softly. One filled the air with the scent of sandalwood and sea salt. Another played a soft note, like the first tone of a flute learning to weep. She paused before an archway made of woven vines and echoes. She did not step through. Instead, she touched it, and instantly she was elsewhere. A garden, but not her own. This one was wide and sunlit, with roses that seemed to hum and dandelions that glowed faintly, even in daylight. Children danced barefoot in the grass, not playing but dancing, as if each step was both question and answer. She watched herself watching them. This version of her, older perhaps, or wiser. She was kneeling by a pond, speaking to the water, not with words, with presence. The older her turned, smiled, and whispered across the space between. When you stop asking the question out loud, the answer becomes a song. Liana blinked. She was back in the hallway of archways, and the old man was beside her. Tonight, he wore a robe made of stars, and his beard sparkled as if dusted with frost. "You are beginning to feel the temple as part of yourself," he said. She nodded. "It doesn't feel like I go somewhere anymore. It feels like I return." He placed a hand over his heart. Because it was never a place. It is the remembering of what you've never truly forgotten. They walked in silence. Ahead, a spiral staircase formed from words, floating, golden, moving gently like the pages of a book in wind. Each step bore a phrase. She stepped on the first. To walk is to wonder. The next, to wonder is to remember. Then, to remember is to become. Each step drew her higher, but not upward. Deeper, inward, through layers of self and story. When she reached the top, she found herself in a room filled with bowls of light. Each bowl pulsed with a rhythm, some slow, like sleeping whales in deep ocean, others quick and delicate, like a hummingbird's breath. "These," said the old man, "are moments of compassion." She looked closely. In one bowl, a boy knelt beside a wounded bird, whispering to it gently, offering crumbs and company. In another, a woman washed the feet of a stranger during a rainstorm, her face lined with grief, yet peaceful. Another showed a man who handed his only coat to someone shivering at a train station. He did not pause, did not speak. He simply gave and walked on. Liana pressed her hand to her chest. "I can feel them," she whispered, "as if they happened to me." "They did," the old man said, "to the part of you that has no name and lives in all things." She closed her eyes, and in that moment her chest filled with warmth so pure it made tears fall without sorrow. Not sadness, not joy, just truth. The old man walked to a large mirror at the far end of the room. It was not reflective. Instead, it shimmered with potential. He gestured for her to come closer. "Ask nothing," he said. "Simply gaze." She stood before the mirror, and in it she saw not herself, but possibilities. 1,000 versions of her. Not better, not worse, just different. In one, she was a midwife, holding a newborn up to the morning sun. In another, a silent painter crafting visions from silence. In another, she simply walked alone by a river, smiling with no reason except the presence of the breeze. The mirror shimmered, and all the versions merged into one. A light that pulsed gently, as if breathing. She stepped away. "I don't know what to do with all this," she said softly. "It's beautiful, but what does it mean?" The old man turned to her. "It does not mean, it is. Meaning is the echo. Being is the source." She looked at him. "Then why do we always search for answers?" "Because the search softens the ego, and in that softness, wonder blooms." She sat down. The room changed again. Now she was in a library, one where every book was blank. Yet, as she opened each, words began to appear. Not printed, but written in ink that moved like water. The text shimmered and swirled, never the same twice. When she looked closely, she realized the stories were formed from thoughts she hadn't had yet. And yet they felt like home. One passage read, "The moment you stop needing to arrive, you realize you've always been where you needed to be." Another, "Kindness is not an act, it is an atmosphere." Another, "The soul drinks silence like the body drinks water." She closed the book gently. The old man sat beside her again, now looking younger still, perhaps no older than she. "I think," she whispered, "this place is love." He nodded. Not love as desire, not love as emotion, love as awareness. She rested her head against the back of the chair. The air became music again, soft, wordless, made of threads from ancient lullabies, and the temple breathed with her. One breath in, one breath out. The books, the pools, the mirrors, the archways, all of them began to drift like clouds in the sky of her mind, not vanishing, just resting. She stood, once more ready to return. The old man walked with her to the edge of the silence. "You may forget these moments when you wake," he said, "but they will shape you all the same." She nodded. "I don't need to remember with my mind. My soul will remember for me." He smiled and stepped back. She turned and walked through the door. This time, as she returned, the moon was still low, and the candle beside her bed had only burned halfway down. Time outside the temple had barely moved. She sat up slowly. She poured a glass of cool water. She lit a piece of sweet grass and let the smoke drift through the window. She whispered no prayers, only gratitude. And as her head returned to the pillow, her breath deepened, not with exhaustion, but with surrender. The temple would be there. It always was. Not in a place, but in the silence between moments. The space where wondering is sacred, and questions are doorways, and love needs no name. The day in Calliope had been long only by the measures of the sun. But to the villagers, time did not stretch or shrink. It simply accompanied them like an old friend. Children had spent the morning threading wildflowers through each other's hair, while the baker's laugh echoed warmly through the square. Someone had played a harp near the fountain, soft and clumsy but earnest, and the sound drifted like petals in wind. Liana spent most of the day in silence, not from sorrow, but from fullness. She moved slowly through her garden, her fingers trailing along rosemary and creeping thyme. She sipped warm milk with cinnamon. She wrote a single word in her notebook, trust, and then closed it, content. She could feel the temple waiting. It no longer pulled her. It welcomed her. That night, she needed no ceremony. She simply closed her eyes and allowed herself to dissolve. And in that dissolving, the temple emerged. She found herself standing barefoot on a floor made entirely of light, light that didn't shine, but listened. Each step she took whispered beneath her feet, as if remembering dreams she had once forgotten. The space around her was vast, round, open. The air held the scent of rain on parchment. She walked forward, not because she knew where she was going, but because the silence led her. Tonight, there was no old man waiting, only a mirror. It floated in the center of the space, framed by nothing but breath and intention. She approached it slowly. This was not the mirror of before. This mirror did not show versions of her. It showed a forest, a living, breathing forest at night, with stars flickering above and mist curling at its roots. A fire glowed quietly in the center, and around it sat 6 figures. They were not looking at her, they were listening, to someone just outside the edge of the reflection. And as Liana leaned closer, she heard it. A voice, not hers, and yet deeply hers, telling a story. A story about a child who once found a pebble that hummed with secrets. The child carried the pebble for years, through storms and sunlight, asking it questions. And one day, the pebble sang. Not with answers, with remembrance. She kept listening. The fire crackled. The figures around it were still. One wiped a tear. Another held their chest. All were still listening. Liana realized that the voice was telling the story now, in this moment, even as she stood in the temple. And then it stopped. The forest faded. The mirror melted into mist. She turned around. The old man was there again, seated quietly on a step that hadn't been there a moment ago. But he wasn't watching her. He was watching the place where the mirror had been, as though still listening to the voice that had vanished. "You told a story tonight," he said. Liana sat beside him. "But I didn't speak." He looked at her gently. "Not with your mouth, but you are beginning to remember the language of the soul." She took a deep breath. "It doesn't use words," she whispered. "Number. But it moves through them." She sat quietly. "I didn't know I could speak that way." "You always have. You just forgot where the voice lives." He rose and extended his hand. "Come, let me show you something." She took his hand. He led her through an archway made of autumn wind and dried leaves. It crunched softly beneath their feet, though there was no floor, just sensation shaped into memory. They came into a chamber filled with floating globes, each the size of a breath. Within them swirled scenes, not visions, not dreams, but feelings given form. The old man touched one. It unfolded into a melody so soft that it could only be felt in the skin. A memory of being held as a child. The warmth of trust before names were learned. The safety of breath shared. Another globe. The weightless ache of watching someone you love walk away, and the silent gift of letting them go. Another. A moment of laughter so pure it seemed to echo across time. Liana wept without sorrow. She touched one of the globes. It shimmered and became a field of poppies, stretching out beneath a sky filled with stars so close they looked like lanterns. A younger version of herself danced alone in that field, barefoot, singing nonsense to the stars. She tripped once, laughed, and kept singing. The memory faded, but the feeling stayed. "Why do we forget these things?" she asked. "Because remembering too soon would stop us from becoming." She looked at him. "Then what is remembering for?" "For arriving," he said. "Not to a destination, but to the moment that always was." She sat down again. The temple changed around her. Now it was a circle of water, with stepping stones leading outward. Each stone pulsed with a different question. She stood at the edge and listened. The first stone whispered, "What am I holding that no longer needs carrying?" The second, "What truth waits behind my fear?" The third, "Who was I before I was told who to be?" The fourth, "What does stillness ask of me today?" She stepped onto each one, not to answer, to feel. And with each step, a piece of her past softened, like thawed snow sliding quietly from an old roof. By the time she reached the fifth stone, she no longer needed the questions. She simply stood, and in standing, she became the stillness. The temple faded into something older than thought. She was now standing in a field with no borders. The sky was soft, like dusk wrapped in silk. The ground beneath her was made of dreams turned to soil. And in front of her stood a tree, a simple one, tall, unremarkable, yet utterly sacred. She knew this tree. It had stood in the back of her childhood home, the one that lived in memory more than geography. She had climbed its branches, whispered to its leaves, and once buried a marble beneath it that she never found again. She walked up to it and pressed her hand to its trunk. It breathed. A low hum, like a heart older than the world. A voice, not hers, not the old man's, rose within the air. Not sound, not words, only the feeling of being seen without being judged, held without being grasped, loved without being named. She fell to her knees, not in surrender, but in fullness. She had found the center, not of the temple, of herself. And that center was not a destination. It was a remembering. The tree shimmered once, gently, and the entire field exhaled with her. She rose slowly, the sky fading into soft, colorless light. She was back in the temple. The old man stood at a distance now, not because he was leaving, but because she was arriving. "You no longer need me as a guide," he said. She smiled at him. "I never needed you, but I loved walking with you." He bowed. She bowed in return, and then she walked, not toward a door, but into the light that rose like dawn from within her. When she opened her eyes, the candle beside her had gone out on its own. The milk was cool, the village was sleeping. And so was she now, as her body gently let go and her soul hummed the lullaby of all that had been remembered. For the sacred temple of Socrates has no walls, no boundaries, no ending. Only breath, only being, only becoming. And it waits, as always, for those who are ready to feel. The rain came to Calliope like a soft confession. It didn't storm, didn't hurry. It simply arrived, one drop at a time, until the village shimmered with silence made visible. The roofs wept gently. The stone paths darkened. The leaves glistened, grateful. Even the birds, usually so eager to greet the sky, remained hushed beneath branches, listening. Liana sat beside her window, a blanket pulled up to her chin, and a mug of anise tea warming her hands. She had spoken no words all day, nor had any reason to. Her thoughts moved like clouds, not heavy, not urgent, just passing. She had dreamed the temple the night before, even before she entered it. Not with visions or voices, but with a feeling, like something waiting. Not to be discovered, but to be noticed. Now, as the rain softened the village into a lullaby, she let her eyes close. Not to escape, but to open. And as she breathed in, she stepped inward. There was no olive tree tonight, no pathway, no shift from world to world. There was only the temple, and it rose around her, not as something separate, but as something remembered, like a childhood tune she hadn't heard in years but could still hum perfectly. She stood barefoot upon a field of quiet. It wasn't made of grass or sand. It was made of hush, the kind of hush that lives between the turning of pages in an old book. Far ahead, a hill curved upward, and at its summit, a doorway flickered. Not the usual door of silence. This one was made of laughter and tears, intertwined like two vines that had never known separation. Each step stirred memories beneath her feet. The first step, the smell of her grandmother's hair. The second, the sound of firewood cracking on a cold night. The third, a lullaby sung off-key, but full of love. The fourth, silence after goodbye. She reached the top. The door opened without waiting for her hand. She stepped through. Inside was not a room. It was a memory, but not hers alone. A wide hall of chairs carved from thought. Shelves that held jars of emotions, some full, some nearly empty, all gently pulsing with light. In the center of the space, a round table made entirely of questions. Not written questions, living ones. Each one flickered like a candle, waiting to be noticed. She walked to the table. Saturday, and placed her palms flat upon its surface. One question rose like mist. What did you forget in order to survive? Another. Which parts of you are waiting to be welcomed home? Another. What would happen if you were no longer afraid of your own softness? She didn't answer. She wept, and the table wept with her, not from pain, from recognition. The old man arrived, silent, steady. He did not sit. He stood behind her, not as teacher, not as guide, as presence. He placed a hand upon her shoulder, and for the first time, Liana felt something shift. Not in the temple, in her. A door opened within her chest, and through it came not a story, not a vision, but a knowing so clear it did not need to be explained. She was not visiting the temple. She was the temple, not the whole of it, but a doorway within it, a room, a breath, a song. The temple lived through her as much as she through it, and suddenly everything became simple. She turned to face him. "I think I understand now," she said, voice trembling. He nodded. "Then say it," he replied gently. "I've never been separate from anything. I just stopped listening. And now, I'm listening again." He smiled. "Then walk." She did. The room changed. Now she walked through a forest of hanging lights. Each light was a word someone had once spoken in kindness. They hovered like fireflies, whispering softly, "I believe in you. You're not alone. I'm here. Take your time. You are enough." She stopped and held one between her fingers. It melted into her skin and settled somewhere just behind her ribs. She felt stronger, not louder, not bigger, just more herself. At the edge of the forest stood a stone bench beneath a tree with silver bark. A child sat there. The child looked up and smiled. It was her, younger but not frightened, just waiting. Liana sat beside her. "Are you ready to remember?" the child asked. "I'm trying," she replied. The child reached out and touched her heart. It didn't hurt. It opened. And in that opening, memories flowed. Not stories, sensations. A time she laughed without needing reason. The moment she first felt rain on her eyelids. The night she sang to the stars, and the stars sang back. "I've missed you," Liana whispered. "You never lost me," said the child. "You just needed space to grow around the silence." They sat together a long time. Then the child faded. Not gone, just rejoined. Liana stood and walked again. Now she entered a hall of names, but none were written. They were sung. Each name echoed in the air like a thread of melody, each carrying a memory of love, of longing, of letting go. One name caught her ear. She turned. It was hers. Not Liana. Not any word spoken in this world, but a sound that vibrated so deeply it made her bones weep with joy. It meant something close to, the one who listens between the notes. She repeated it in her mind. It repeated her. And all around her, the temple breathed that sound back to her in countless forms. A flickering candle, a breeze through ivy, a ripple in still water. She placed her hand on her chest. "I'm ready," she said softly. And the temple opened again, this time into a garden. The garden was not perfect. Some leaves were curled, some flowers closed, but everything pulsed with aliveness, not beauty, presence. And she realized perfection was never the point. Being with was the miracle, The old man joined her. Now his robe was stitched from poems. She turned to him, asking no question. He offered no answer. They stood together, watching a butterfly land on a dying bloom, and both smiled. It was enough. Later, as twilight came to the temple and stars began to blink softly into view, Liana laid herself down upon a bed of moss that hummed with lullabies. She did not ask for dreams. She did not seek visions. She simply slept, held by the temple, held by herself, held by the infinite love that asks nothing but that we be. And in Calliope, the rain eased. A single drop traced the window pane beside her bed, curling like the spiral of a question returning to its source. Her breath slowed, her body sighed, and the temple remained. Not a place, not a journey, but a remembering, waiting gently, endlessly, patiently, for the next breath, for the next question, for the next soul ready to listen. Calliope slept beneath a blanket of stars that night. The sky stretched wide and slow like a deep breath drawn across the heavens. The air was cooler now, touched by the quiet breath of the sea from beyond the hills. Not even the owls stirred. It was a night made for deep silence, the kind that wraps gently around you and hums. Rest now. All things are held. Liana sat on her porch, barefoot and still, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. A lantern flickered beside her, its flame dancing to the rhythm of her breath. She had not spoken aloud in 3 days, not out of retreat, but reverence. Words, she had come to understand, were not always the truest language. She had walked the hills that day, touched the stone cairns left by old wanderers, knelt by the streams where wild mint grew, and listened to bees without asking them for meaning. The world had spoken, and she had simply listened. And now, as the stars shimmered like remembered names, she knew it was time again. Not to go somewhere, but to fall inward. The temple was already within her, waiting in stillness, like water waiting for the sky's reflection. She closed her eyes, placed her palm upon her heart, and whispered nothing. And in that nothing, the temple returned. She stood this time in a chamber shaped like a circle, but with no walls. The space itself curved inward like a womb of thought. The ground beneath her shimmered like the surface of a calm lake, reflecting not her image, but her essence. Above, the stars of the temple's sky pulsed slowly, like the breathing of the universe. She took a step. The space responded with a sound, low and round, like a bell rung beneath water. Then another step. A chime, soft and bright, joined the first. The temple was composing music from her movements, not to entertain, but to acknowledge her presence. As she walked further into the chamber, a soft curtain of light descended, like mist folding in from the corners of a dream. Through it, she saw what appeared to be a door, not like any she'd entered before. This one was made entirely of memory. Not the past, not the future, but memory that lives outside of time. She stepped through it, and suddenly she was standing at a long table in a sun-drenched courtyard, surrounded by people she did not know, and yet knew intimately. Some were young, others very old. Some wore clothes of silk and gold, others wrapped in linen and soil. All were quiet, hands resting softly on the table, their eyes closed, faces peaceful. She stood at the end of the table. No one acknowledged her with words, but their stillness welcomed her. She understood. This was the council of unspoken truths. She sat. A warm breeze stirred a feather across the stone floor. One of the figures, a woman with skin like ancient bark and eyes full of stars, opened her eyes and looked at Liana. "You are ready," she said. "Ready for what?" Liana whispered. "To ask the question that has no answer." Liana nodded, though she wasn't sure how or why. The woman reached into the air and drew forth a scroll. But when she unrolled it, there were no words, only a spiral, drawn in ink that shimmered like breath. "This is the question," she said, "not to be solved, but to be walked." Liana reached out and touched the spiral. Instantly, she found herself in a great desert. The sky above was blue without end, and the sand beneath her was warm and alive, whispering beneath her feet. She was alone, but she did not feel lonely. A voice rose from within the wind. "What remains when the rolls are removed?" She walked. The sand shifted gently, like the backs of sleeping animals. Each step offered no destination, only deepening. As she walked, pieces of herself fell away, not painfully, but like petals from a flower that had fully bloomed. First, her name, then her memory of time, then her questions, until she was walking as pure presence. And then she reached a dune unlike the others, tall, glowing slightly, as if lit from within by a thought too old to be spoken. At the top, a small stone sat alone. She knelt beside it, and from deep within her a sound rose. Not a voice, not even a tone, a feeling made audible. And as it emerged, the stone cracked gently, and from it rose a tendril of mist. Within the mist, the old man. But now he had no face, only light. He said nothing, but she understood. He was not himself. He was a reflection of the wisdom that lives in all who are willing to see. She bowed. He bowed, and the desert faded. She was back in the chamber. The table now held a single bowl filled with water. She looked into it. It did not show her reflection. It showed a seed, and the seed pulsed gently, waiting. The woman spoke again. "The seed does not ask the soil for proof. It trusts the darkness. It trusts the waiting." Liana touched the water. The seed dissolved into rings of light that moved across the surface like ripples of becoming. She stood. She did not need to stay. She had received what could not be spoken, and it lived now within her. As she returned through the veil of memory, the temple shifted again. Now it held the shape of a mountain path, narrow but safe. She walked it with bare feet, each step brushing against moss that murmured old poems. At the summit stood a tree. Its branches reached not into the sky, but into silence. She placed her hands upon its trunk and closed her eyes. And in that moment, she heard every person who had ever entered the temple, not in words, but in yearning. Each one asking not to know, but to feel, to belong, to be. And they were all here, always had been, always would be. The temple was not just for her, it was through her, and she through it. She whispered, "Thank you," not to the temple, not to the guides, not to the visions, but to herself, for remembering. When she returned to Calliope, dawn had just begun to color the sky. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like forgiveness. She stood on her porch, still wrapped in her shawl. A single bird sang. Not loudly, just enough. Liana smiled and closed her eyes. She did not need to enter the temple today, because the temple had entered her. And somewhere in the silence, it waited, not as a place, but as a promise, ready for the next breath, the next wonder, the next soft step home. The day opened with mist, not heavy, just enough to blur the lines between things, between tree and sky, between footpath and memory, between now and forever. Calliope awoke slowly beneath its silver breath, as though even the village itself was wrapped in meditation. The fields held their hush. The birds delayed their chorus. And time paused long enough for even the dreams still clinging to pillows to whisper their goodbyes. Liana moved through her home like a cloud drifting through familiar forest. She washed her hands with cool water and rosemary. She swept her floor in circles, not for dust, but for clarity. She placed a sprig of dried lavender by her door and whispered a blessing, not for protection, but for remembering. The temple, she felt, had already begun. Its door no longer waited in olive bark or moonlit silence. It moved with her now, in each breath, each thought, each moment that slowed enough to be seen. She closed her eyes as the mist kissed her face and stepped inward, not through vision, but through surrender. And the temple received her. Tonight, or this moment, for the temple did not speak in hours, was different. She was not standing, she was floating, not above, not below, simply within. The space around her pulsed with rhythm, soft like the heart of a sleeping child. The colors around her moved like breath made visible, blues that whispered peace, golds that remembered joy, silvers that tasted like longing. No walls, no paths, only presence. She drifted slowly, and as she moved, the air sang, not with melody, but with recognition. The temple knew her, and she, now, knew it. She passed what appeared to be a constellation, stars arranged not in maps of navigation, but in symbols of soul. One cluster formed the shape of a listening ear, another an open palm. A third shimmered in the shape of a spiral, always returning, never ending. She reached toward one, and her fingers passed through it like wind through water. And then she heard a voice, her own, but from somewhere far in her past. She was a child again, whispering a question to the stars as she lay on a thatched roof in some forgotten village. Why do I feel like I've been here before? And the stars had not answered then. But now the temple did. Because you never truly left. She smiled, and her body softened even more until she was no longer floating, but simply being, held by space, by stillness, by truth. Slowly, a shape formed in the soft dusk of the temple's breath. It was a door. But this one shimmered with images, fragments of lives lived, of thoughts thought, of love both lost and returned. She stepped through it, and found herself standing in a round room made entirely of memory. It was not her memory, nor someone else's. It was collective, a great bowl of stories echoing faintly across the curved walls. And in the center, a fountain. But instead of water, the fountain poured stories, liquid memory, flowing down into the floor, rising as mist into the air. She approached it. The closer she came, the more clearly she could feel the voices, not as noise, but as emotion, not speaking, remembering. I held her hand until she forgot my name, and still I called her beloved. I let go because love asked me to, not because I wanted to. I stayed silent, not out of fear, but because I knew the world wasn't ready for what I knew. Liana closed her eyes, let the mist kiss her face, and with it came her own remembering. She had once stood beside a river in a life long past, holding a lantern for souls who had forgotten how to find the other side. She had once lived in the mountains, where she sang into stones until they softened enough to whisper secrets. She had once been a wind, invisible, carrying pollen from one forgotten dream to another. The fountain shimmered brighter. She touched its edge, and it spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in a knowing. You are not a visitor here. You are a vessel. And she understood. She walked away from the fountain, no longer seeking. Instead, she offered. Her steps led her into another chamber. This one shaped like an amphitheater, carved from thought and lit by silence. At its center, a single flame burned, not fire, but presence, and around it sat figures. Some were cloaked, some transparent, some no more than outlines made of memory. All turned as she entered, but none judged. They made room. She sat among them, and the flame grew, not in size, in truth. Each flicker showed a vision, not future, not past, but essence. She saw a tree growing where none should grow, between two rocks on a windswept cliff. She saw a child share their only bread with a stranger who wore hunger like a second skin. She saw an old woman exhale her last breath, and the wind carry it into a song that would find its way to a child not yet born. The flame paused, then pulsed, and in that pulse she heard the question, not spoken by a voice, but by being itself. What will you carry forward? She did not answer. She stood, stepped into the flame, and it received her. She felt nothing burn, only unfold, and on the other side she stood once more beneath the stars of the temple sky. Now they sang to her, not in sound, in knowing, and she sang back, without melody, with stillness. The old man appeared then, not from distance but from within the stars themselves. Tonight he looked young again, as if the temple had let him rest in memory. You remembered, he said. Liana nodded. I forgot again, didn't I? She whispered. You did, and you will. She smiled. And the forgetting is also sacred. He took her hand. It is the soil in which remembrance blooms. They stood there, two souls in stillness as the temple exhaled. Then a bell rang, soft wear only once, but it echoed through every part of her being. The old man looked toward the horizon where the temple's edges curled into mist. It's time, he said. For what? She asked. He turned to her, eyes like dusk. To speak. Liana tilted her head. I thought the temple was about listening. It is, but every silence longs for a voice to hold it. She placed her hand on her chest, felt her heartbeat, slow, steady, a language. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then say that, he smiled, and the rest will come. She did not return through a door this time. She simply opened her eyes. Calliope was still wrapped in mist. The sun had not yet broken through, and yet everything was brighter. She stood on her porch and faced the sky. Then, in a voice no louder than the wind, she spoke. "I remember." And the village, the trees, the birds, the sky, all listened, for the temple had spoken through her, and it would speak again, forever. The morning mist of Calliope had faded, drawn back into the sky like breath returning to the chest. The village now rested in the golden hush of mid-morning, the kind of hour where even the bees seemed to move more slowly. Liana sat beside the old fountain in the village square, watching reflections ripple across its surface. She stirred the water gently with her fingers. The patterns it made reminded her of stories, those told not with words, but with glances, pauses, and dreams half remembered. Villagers passed by, nodding in silence. No one disturbed her. In Calliope, people understood that some moments were not meant to be filled. She had not visited the temple in 2 days, and yet it was all she breathed. She felt it now more than ever, in the way light touched water, in the scent of bread carried from the baker's open door, in the silence between birdsong. The temple lived within her. But today, something stirred. It wasn't a call, not a summons, more like a memory pressing softly against the skin of the present. So, when the hour came, she returned home without deciding to, entered her room without intention, and lay upon her bed as naturally as one would drink after thirst. She closed her eyes and let go, and the temple rose. She stood beneath a sky the color of a bruise, purple, soft, vast. The ground beneath her feet was warm and smooth, as though it had once been water and decided, out of kindness, to become solid just for her. She read, "You are the stillness beneath the wave, the hand that holds without grasping, the question that is not seeking an answer, but offering a home." She placed her hand upon the book, closed it gently, and whispered, "I remember." The tree exhaled, and so did she. She stood, turned. The temple faded like a sigh into silence, and she returned. Calliope was quiet, the sun now low, resting its gold gently on the rooftops. Children's laughter trickled like bells in the distance. Liana stood by her window, watched the breeze carry the leaves in soft spirals, and in her heart she held the book with no pages. Its truths pulsed softly inside her. No need to tell, only to live. And far within her, the temple waited once more. Not as a place, but as a promise, a breathing, a remembering. Night fell upon Calliope with the quiet grace of a mother tucking in a child. The village glowed in the soft halo of lamplight, the kind made not for seeing far, but for making the near things warm. From one rooftop came the slow, comforting hum of an old man playing the flute, not for an audience, but for the sky. Somewhere deeper in the hills, a cow let out a long, satisfied sigh, as if even animals could feel the peace of this place. Liana sat beneath the fig tree behind her cottage, her shawl draped over her shoulders like a whispered memory. In her hands was a bowl of water, nothing more. Yet the way she gazed into it, one might think it held the reflection of the stars themselves. It did. Not the stars above, but the stars within. She had not visited the temple in 3 nights, and yet the temple had never left her. Each breath, each heartbeat, each simple act of being had become a kind of pilgrimage. And yet tonight, something stirred. Not urgency, not a question, but an invitation. She closed her eyes. The fig leaves rustled above her. The air shifted. The candle in her kitchen flickered, though there was no breeze. And then she was within. The temple. It rose around her like a memory waking gently from sleep. She stood now in a wide open courtyard made of sand that shimmered under moonlight. The stars above were closer than before, as if leaning in to listen. At the far end of the courtyard stood a structure she had never seen. A tall archway made of obsidian and honey, framed by 7 torches burning with colorless flame. Beneath the arch, the old man waited, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a figure cloaked in feathers, their face hidden beneath a mask carved from driftwood. Their eyes shone through the slits, not with light, but with knowing. Liana approached. Neither figure spoke. Instead, they stepped aside, and beyond the arch, the space shifted. It was not a room. It was not a path. It was a threshold, a space made for crossing. She understood. She stepped through, and the temple disappeared. In its place, a vast black sky. No stars, no ground, no sound. Only her, and a question, not spoken, but felt. Who are you when no one remembers your name? Liana stood still. There was no form to take, no story to carry, no mask to wear. She drifted, not forward, not backward, just was. And in that wasness, something bloomed, a light, small, golden, like the first firefly in a field of dusk. It pulsed once, and then again, and then it began to speak, not in words, but in truth. Each pulse carried a knowing. You are not the name they gave you. You are not the roles you learned to perform. You are not the stories others handed to you. You are the breath beneath all of it. You are the watcher, the keeper, the silent bell before it rings. She wept, not from sorrow, but from recognition. The light drew closer, and now it was a mirror, floating, weightless, timeless. She looked, and for the first time saw herself not as she had been, but as she truly was, formless, radiant, a weave of presence, patience, purpose. No need for explanation. She bowed to the mirror, and the mirror bowed back. Then it shattered, silently, into dust that sparkled and dissolved into her chest. She breathed in, and the sky turned gold. The temple returned, not as walls or pathways, but as remembrance. She was standing now in a meadow filled with stillness. The grass hummed with calm, the air pulsed with kindness, and in the center of the field stood a table carved from moonlight. Upon it, a single bowl. She approached, looked inside. It held a key, small, simple, worn. She picked it up, felt its weight, felt its purpose. She turned, and behind her now stood a door made of everything she had ever forgotten. It held images, moments she had denied, truths she had buried, longings she had silenced. She stepped toward it. The key in her hand vibrated with readiness, and before she placed it into the lock, she spoke softly, not to the door, but to herself. "I forgive you." The door opened, and within was a garden, overgrown, untended, wild, and still it welcomed her. She stepped inside. There, among the vines and tangled thoughts, she found herself kneeling beside a small plant, bent, but alive. Its leaves trembled. She touched it. "I remember you," she said. It lifted its head, and from the soil more plants began to rise. One for every truth she had once buried. One for every dream she thought too fragile to keep. One for every version of herself that had waited in the dark for her return. The garden bloomed, not neatly, but fully. She stood in its center, and the old man appeared once more. Now he carried a lantern, not to light her way, but to show that she had become the light. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. "For what?" "To leave the temple behind." She froze. "But I only just began to understand it." He smiled. "And now you see, it was never a place. It was always a reflection." She looked around. The garden pulsed. The stars bowed. And then she understood. The temple was not something she entered. It was something she carried. The real temple was her breath, her kindness, her listening, her presence in the world that waited for remembering. She stepped forward. The lantern passed to her hand. Its flame caught upon her skin and did not burn. It belonged. She turned toward the open field, walked without needing to look back, and with each step, the temple faded. Not into nothing, but into everything. When she opened her eyes, she was back beneath the fig tree. The bowl of water at her feet reflected not the stars above, but the stars within. She rose, walked into her home, and lit a single candle, then another, then another, each flame a prayer not for knowing, but for being. Outside, the night waited, listening, and within it, so did the temple. Now quiet, now complete, now her. It was one of those evenings in Calliope when everything glowed just a little more warmly than usual, as if the village itself were giving thanks. The hills turned amber beneath the retiring sun, and the trees held still, not from windlessness, but from reverence. Even the shadows fell softer, curling around doorways like cats preparing to rest. Liana sat at the edge of the stone well in the village square, watching the sky ripple with gold. Children had passed earlier, laughing, barefoot, chasing echoes. Now they were gone, and silence returned. Not empty, but full. She touched the side of the well gently. It had never spoken to her, but today it hummed. A deep hum, not from its stones nor its water, from within her. The temple, it seemed, was not finished, and she, though whole, was still unfolding. She stood slowly and returned to her cottage, her hands passing over the herbs drying above her door. She whispered no spell, no mantra. She simply entered the house, the moment, the breath, and within that breath the temple opened again. It did not rise like before. It returned, as if it had always been there, only waiting for the silence to be deep enough. She stood now in a hallway made of breath. The walls pulsed like lungs, slow, steady. The ceiling curved like the inside of a seashell. and the floor, though solid, moved beneath her feet, not to carry her, but to listen. She walked. At intervals, alcoves appeared, small spaces carved from memory. In one, an old woman stirred soup and sang softly to a cat. In another, a man wrote letters he would never send, smiling faintly. In a third, two hands reached for each other in a dim room, meeting not out of passion, but relief. She touched each moment lightly, and they shimmered, not to vanish, to rest. Ahead, a new doorway appeared, this one shaped not by form, but by rhythm. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She stepped through, and was surrounded by sound. Not noise, but the memory of sound. A child's gasp at snowfall, a mother's exhale after birth, a drumbeat in a village long gone, laughter underwater, footsteps in a library, a heart slowing beside another at night. The room was made of these things, woven together into a silence deeper than anything she had ever known. The old man was there, but he said nothing. He simply placed a stone into her palm. It was smooth, it was warm, and when she closed her hand around it, the room changed. She now stood in a vast field of doors. Thousands, each door unique. One carved from glass, another sewn from fabric. One appeared to be made of wind held in place by memory. She understood. These were the doors of others. People, souls, some alive, some long departed, all walking their own temple. She turned slowly. One door shimmered for her, worn, wooden, a single leaf painted on its face. She stepped toward it, opened it, and stepped into a room shaped like a question. The floor curved upward into the ceiling. The walls bent toward each other, and at the center, a fire burned. Not hot, not wild, but wise. She sat beside it. Let her thoughts fall into its flame, one by one. Who am I now that I carry no titles? What does it mean to serve without being needed? How can I love without disappearing? Each thought became smoke, not disappearing, becoming sky. The fire spoke in warmth. There is nothing you must hold, only that which asks to be honored. She breathed. The old man returned, not as a guide now, as a reflection. He knelt across from her. Between them the fire glowed, and into it he placed a single seed. "What is it?" she asked. "Possibility," he replied. "Yours." The fire accepted the seed, and the flame turned green for a breath, then gold, then clear, and in that clarity a path appeared, not ahead, within. She followed it, not with feet, with trust. And soon she stood at a cliffside. Below her, a sea of time. Above her, sky of listening. The wind carried voices, not shouting, calling. People calling to their own hearts. "I remember you. Come back. It's time." Each voice gentle, each voice true. Liana wept again, not from sorrow, from knowing. She was one of them, calling to herself. She turned, and there was the fig tree, her fig tree, rooted in both worlds. She touched its bark and felt the pulse of the temple. the same pulse in her chest. She sat beneath it, closed her eyes, and the temple folded into her, not ending, beginning again. Calliope breathed in the hush of night. Liana opened her eyes. The stars were awake. The air was thick with kindness. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply was. And within her, the temple still waited. Calliope had grown even quieter tonight. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of fullness. Even the breeze had stopped to listen. Windows glowed gently from within, not from candles or lanterns, but from something deeper, like light choosing to stay close to warmth. The moon was full, but it did not shine brightly. Instead, it glowed with the softness of a mother's hand on a sleeping child's back. Inside her cottage, Liana sat on the floor beside the hearth. The fire had long gone out, but she didn't need its heat. She felt something else now, something pulsing low and steady inside her chest. A kind of call, not urgent, not demanding, just present. The temple was not summoning her. It was ready for her, and she was ready for it. She leaned her head gently against the wall, closed her eyes, exhaled, and stepped inward. She was walking through mist, but not the kind that hides. This mist revealed. Shapes formed within it, slow, ephemeral, kind. A field of arms reaching for sunlight. A child letting go of a balloon. An elder blessing a sleeping stranger. Each image floated past her like a thought that had learned to take form only when honored. She passed beneath an archway made of feathers and folded pages, and emerged into a space that felt like the inside of an idea. The walls breathed, the floor pulsed, and overhead thousands of lanterns floated, not high, but near. Each one contained a name, not names like Liana or Socrates or Calliope, but names older than language. Names like tenderness that waits, the breath between questions, the sound of returning, river that knows its way. She walked slowly beneath them. Some flickered as she passed. Others drifted closer. One floated directly in front of her. She reached out, touched it, and in a shimmer of light, she was no longer in the chamber. She stood on a mountain trail. Night sky above, earth pulsing beneath, and ahead, her own shadow walking just ahead of her. It didn't lead. It didn't follow. It simply walked with her. She caught up to it, and then it turned and smiled. It had her face, but it was her without effort, her without masks, her without fear. It spoke, not with a voice, but with presence. I'm the version of you that waited while you forgot. Liana nodded. Tears filled her eyes. I've missed you. The shadow smiled wider. I was never gone. You just needed to grow into the silence where I live. They walked together. No words, just rhythm. The trail led them to a circle of stones atop the mountain, and in the center of the stones, a mirror. But this mirror was not made to reflect appearance. It reflected origin. She looked and saw herself made of earth and rain, of song and question, of night and breath. She saw 1,000 lives before this one, some silent, some singing, some breaking, some healing, all part of the same current. The shadow stepped behind her and whispered, "You are the question that remembers it is also the answer." Liana knelt, not to bow, but to listen more deeply. The stones around her hummed, each one shaped like a thought she once feared. One read, "You are too much." Another, "You are not enough." A third, "You will be forgotten." She touched each stone, and each one softened into moss. And from the moss, flowers bloomed, not of color, but of truth. She stood, and the shadow merged with her, not disappearing, becoming one. A breeze stirred, and the mountain opened. She was now walking through a forest of memory. The trees whispered her name, not the one she used, but the one her soul answered to. The leaves shimmered with stories. She read them as she passed. One leaf told of a night she stood in the rain, feeling alone, and a single word in her heart kept her from falling apart. Stay. Another told of a dream she had as a child, where a tree whispered, "You belong to the stars just as much as they belong to you." Another, torn and faded, told of a moment when she almost gave up, but chose instead to light one small candle. Each leaf was a chapter, each tree a version of her. She came to a clearing, and in the center, the temple. But this temple was shaped like her breath. Its pillars moved with each inhale. Its walls shimmered with each exhale. It was her, and she entered. Inside, there were no rooms, only moments, some waiting, some dancing, some weeping, all sacred. She walked through them, and they through her. At the far end of the temple, the old man waited. But tonight, he was not old. He was not male. He was not separate. He was presence shaped into kindness. He extended his hands, and in them, a bowl. Inside the bowl, nothing. She took it, held it, and understood. The emptiness was not lack. It was invitation, a space ready to receive. "What do I put in?" she asked. He said nothing, but the bowl shimmered, and her tears fell into it, and her laughter, and her doubts, and her silence, and her breath, and the bowl glowed, not brightly, but completely. She placed it at the center of the temple, and the temple breathed, all of it, with her, around her, as her. The stars above turned slowly. The air pulsed with stillness, and she whispered, "I am the temple." And the walls did not echo, because the temple does not repeat what it already knows. It simply holds. She turned, walked back through the forest, the mountain, the lantern chamber, the mist, and emerged once more beneath her fig tree. Calliope slept, but the stars were wide awake, and they sang, not loudly, not proudly, but with the quiet knowing of those who've always been watching. She looked to them and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." The stars blinked slowly, and within them, the temple breathed. Calliope stirred, not from noise, not from movement, but from something quieter than both, a hush so deep it tapped the strings of her soul like a harp touched by wind. She didn't open her eyes. Not yet. She didn't need to. The air was different. It had thickened with meaning, as if the night itself had drawn closer to witness something sacred. Liana sat beneath the fig tree, her hands cupped in her lap like they still held the bowl, though the bowl was no longer there. Or perhaps it was. Not as a thing, but as a knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't sit in the mind, but in the marrow. A knowledge that doesn't shout its presence, but moves like a tide beneath still waters. She didn't feel changed. She felt remembered. The kind of remembering that weaves itself into the smallest things. The weight of her breath, the arc of her spine, the pulse of her fingertips brushing the grass beside her. Calliope exhaled and slowly opened her eyes. The fig tree leaves above them danced slightly, though no wind touched them. Instead, they danced from within. "Did you find it?" Calliope asked softly, her voice still steeped in dream. Liana turned toward her, smiling gently. "I didn't find it," she said. "It found me." Calliope nodded as if she already knew, as if she had been there too. Perhaps she had, in the way a candle's flame is already present in the unlit wick, just waiting for the right breath. They sat together, wordless. The stars sang their quiet hymn. The earth beneath them breathed like a great sleeping animal, steady, patient, eternal. After some time, Calliope reached into the folds of her robe and drew out a tiny parcel wrapped in faded cloth. "I made this," she said, unwrapping it slowly. Inside, a single stone, smooth, blue-gray, with lines that curled like rivers across its surface. Liana took it gently. "What is it?" she whispered, already knowing it was not a gift in the ordinary sense. Calliope smiled. "It's a doorway from the old well, the one that doesn't give water anymore, but stories." Liana held the stone to her heart, and for a moment all time folded inward. She was in another space. A well, deep and winding, but not dark. Each stone in the wall had a story etched into it. She reached toward one. It pulsed with warmth. The story opened, not in words, but in scent and memory. A mother humming to her child before dawn. A fisherman whispering to the sea for mercy. A girl burying a secret beneath a tree. She touched another. A boy standing barefoot at a cliff's edge, offering his fear to the wind. A village dancing after the rain finally came. A single word spoken over a grave. Forgiven. She pulled back, breath catching. Calliope watched her with kindness. "The well doesn't hold water anymore," she said, "because the village learned to drink from memory." Liana nodded, placing the stone beside her. There were no lessons tonight, only openings. And openings require gentleness. The next morning unfolded like a song with no chorus. Each note new, each pause a prayer. Liana walked the narrow path down to the old riverbed, her feet bare, her eyes softened by sleep and wonder. She wasn't looking for anything. That was the old way, the way of searching, of striving. Now she was walking to greet whatever greeted her. A small child sat on a stone, dipping her fingers into the shallow stream. The water barely moved, but it caught the sun in such a way that each ripple held a different memory. Liana knelt beside her. The child looked up, not startled, not shy, just present. "Do you remember the time before the stories?" the child asked. Liana tilted her head. "Which stories?" The child smiled, her teeth like new moons. "All of them," she said, before words had to carry meaning, before feelings had to fit inside names. Liana blinked slowly. "I think that time still exists," she said. The child nodded. "Here," she said, dipping her hand into the water and cupping it. "Drink." Liana sipped from the child's hand, and suddenly, she was wined over wheat. She was the hush between thunder and rain. She was the moment a seed decides to grow, and she was back. The child stood. "That's enough for now," she said. "The temple doesn't like to be gulped. It prefers sips." Then she vanished. Not as vanishing, but as remembering one has another place to be. Later that afternoon, the villagers gathered beneath the whispering baobab. No one called for the gathering. No one planned it. It was simply time. They brought no instruments, but their bodies became music. They brought no books, but their mouths became scripture. Liana stood among them, not apart. No longer the girl on the edge. Now the woman who had met herself. They sang, not for audience, but for echo. Not to be heard, but to become hearing. One elder began to hum a melody that hadn't been sung since her own mother's passing. A child caught the tune, and the village wove it into dance. Each movement was a memory, each footfall a testimony. Liana closed her eyes. The song carried her inward again, but this time she did not walk the mountain or pass through mist. She stood in the middle of the village and realized the temple had followed her, no longer bound to a place. It was now in the way the old man stroked his beard before speaking, in the way the baker dusted flour across her cheek, laughing, in the quiet joy of children drawing constellations in the dirt, in Calliope's hands as she pressed herbs into little bundles and tied them with red thread. The temple was breath. The temple was pause. The temple was with. And that night, when the stars leaned in once more to listen, Liana sat beneath her fig tree, not to enter, but to remember. She whispered to the dark, "I thought I had to go to the sacred, but the sacred was always going with me." The stars blinked gently, and far away, where stories sleep and dreams rise like steam from the soul's kitchen, the temple breathed again, as her, as night, as now. And so the story folded softly, not ending, just turning another page in the endless book that only opens when you do. The fig tree rustled. The breeze returned. Calliope sighed in her sleep, and somewhere inside everything, a new lantern lit itself, not for light, but for presence, and the story, cozy, eternal, barefoot with wonder, walked on. The morning after the gathering beneath the whispering baobab, the village awoke with a hush still clinging to its rooftops, like dew not yet ready to lift. Liana rose slowly from her mat, not because of the sun's insistence, but because the silence had shifted. It now whispered her name differently, like a friend reminding you gently that something beautiful is waiting. She stepped outside barefoot. The earth felt warm, not from heat, but from memory, as if it remembered every step she had ever taken on its back and was now offering its embrace in return. Children were still asleep. Birds were not yet singing. But in the distance, very faintly, there was the sound of something being woven. Not cloth, but moments. The kind of weaving only time, kindness, and intention could do. She followed the sound. not with urgency, but with permission. It led her through the olive groves, through the long corridor of sleeping fig trees, and to a clearing she had forgotten she remembered. There, beneath a curved arch of living vines, sat an old woman who looked like 1,000 stories braided into one body. Her eyes were closed, but they saw. Her hands moved, not fast, not slow, but in the rhythm of a lullaby sung before time was born. She was weaving with threads made of light. Some were golden, some silver, some nearly invisible, like the shimmer left behind by a well-loved memory. Liana didn't speak. She didn't need to. The old woman paused, looked up, and smiled. You came. The voice was not young, not old. It was the kind of voice that trees would bend slightly to hear. I don't remember being invited, Liana said softly. You were never invited, the woman replied. You were remembered. Liana blinked and understood. This was not a place. This was a remembering. May I sit? She asked. The woman nodded. Not to learn, not to change, only to witness. Liana sat, and the threads danced in the morning air, weaving a tapestry not of pictures, but of feelings. And within the weaving, she saw it. The moment her mother kissed her forehead and forgot to tell her why. The day she buried her first hope beneath the fig tree and whispered, maybe another time. The night her dream did not come true, and yet she still breathed. Each thread pulsed with such gentle knowing that it felt like being held by time itself. What are you making? She asked at last. The woman looked up, her fingers never stopping. I'm weaving the fabric of the now. But isn't now always already here? The woman chuckled. Yes, but we forget. So someone has to remind it of itself, not with clocks, not with calendars, with care. Liana watched the weaving continue. And then, without warning, but not without welcome, she saw a thread of her own being offered by the wind. It floated toward the loom. The woman caught it and wove it in, not to bind it, but to let it sing with the others. And for a brief, tender moment, Liana heard her own story humming back to her, not as regret, not as longing, but as belonging. She closed her eyes and listened. When she opened them again, the woman was gone. The loom was gone. But the weaving remained, in the light between leaves, in the way the morning touched the stones, in the hush that lingered on her skin. Liana stood and walked back toward the village. But she was not returning. She was arriving more fully into each breath, each step, each glance exchanged with the world. When she reached her cottage, Calliope was waiting with 2 steaming cups in her hands. The scent was not of tea. It was of grounding, of roots warmed by fire, of herbs that had remembered her name before she ever learned to speak it. I felt the weaving, Calliope said, handing her a cup. Liana smiled. I gave a thread. Calliope nodded, eyes soft. Then you're beginning to see. To see what? That the temple was never a place you enter, she said. It's the place you become when you stop running from what you already are. That evening, Liana wandered alone to the edge of the river, the one that only flowed when it wanted to. Some seasons it ran wild, humming secrets to the rocks. Other times it held still, as if listening for its own source. Tonight, it was in between. Not flowing, not frozen, just being. She sat on a smooth stone, listened, not to the water, but to herself. And in that stillness, a voice rose, not from outside, not from memory, but from the deep, deep center. It said, "What if you never needed to heal? What if all you needed was to listen long enough to hear how whole you already are?" Tears welled up again, but they didn't fall from pain. They rose from the beauty of finally not needing to chase peace. The river shimmered in agreement, and for the first time in a long time, Liana felt no need to be more than this moment. She stayed until the stars arrived one by one, like friends returning from a long journey, each bearing a candle for her table. And when she stood to return, the moon cast her shadow on the path, not ahead, not behind, but beside her. And it smiled. Days passed, not quickly, not slowly. They passed like breath. Calliope and Liana began gathering with the villagers each evening, not for ceremony, not for ritual, but for remembering. They shared meals without recipes. They shared songs without melody. They shared silences that did not need to be filled. One evening, a child brought a stone and asked Liana, "Can this be part of the temple?" She smiled, "Only if it knows your name." The child placed it on the earth, pressed his hand to it, and whispered something so quietly only the stone could hear. And the wind stirred in approval. Another evening, a man who had long believed he had nothing left to offer stood and simply said, "I forgive myself." And in that moment, a lantern lit without flame. No one clapped, no one cheered, but the stars above pulsed just a little brighter, as if to say, "Yes, this too is sacred." And so the temple continued, not within walls, but within breath, within story, within stillness. Liana spent more time listening than speaking now, more time walking slowly than trying to arrive. She learned to greet even her doubts with the tea and a place to sit. She learned that grief, too, has a song to sing when it feels safe enough to enter the room. One night, alone beneath the fig tree again, she heard the temple breathe within her chest, not as vision, not as memory, but as heartbeat. It said, "You do not belong to the temple. You are the part of it that walks." And for the first time, she truly understood. She had not entered a sacred place. She was a sacred place, and she always had been. Far above, the stars wrote nothing down, because some truths don't need to be recorded. They only need to be lived. And beneath them, in the still warm hush of a night filled with listening, another lantern lit itself quietly within her soul. And the story, gentle, sacred, and without end. Liana had begun to dream in new ways. Not dreams of strange riddles or wild chases, but dreams that felt like letters sent to her by the soul she had forgotten she shared breath with. In one dream, she sat inside a great library with no books, only bowls. Each bowl sang a different tone when she leaned close, and with every note a memory rose, not from the past, but from the possible. She saw herself planting seeds with hands she had not yet grown. She saw an old version of herself, rocking a child who was not born from her body, but from her kindness. She saw herself sitting across a fire from someone whose name she could not recall, but whose sorrow she understood so deeply it echoed in her bones. She woke with the taste of that dream still on her lips, like honey stirred with the ache of something beautiful. Calliope greeted her that morning not with words, but with a shawl woven from silence. They wrapped it around their shoulders and walked through the quietest path, the one that wound behind the well, past the whispering stones, and opened to a glade the children had named the Listening Place. The villagers said the trees there leaned inward slightly, not because of wind, but because they were listening for the next sacred thing. There they met Elian. Elian was the village potter. But he did not mold clay in the usual sense. He shaped vessels not to hold food or water, but echoes. He believed that every silence needed a place to rest. So he made bowls for memory, cups for dreams, and once even a jar shaped like a sigh. Liana had watched him once from afar, confused. Now she sat across from him and understood. Elian offered her a vessel he had just finished. It was simple, earthen, a small thumbprint curved on its side. "What is it for?" she asked softly. He looked at her, eyes full of moonlight. "For the moments you don't know where to place," he said. "Not joy, not sorrow, just the ones that ask to be held." She took it with both hands and pressed it gently to her chest. She felt her own silence settle into it like a bird finding its branch. And she wept, not loudly, not brokenly, but like rain that has waited a long time to return. That afternoon, the village square changed, not in shape, but in energy. It became a garden. No one planted seeds, but the people brought their truths, and the truths bloomed. A young woman who had once tried to leave the village but lost her way stood up and said, "I thought leaving would make me become, but staying helped me remember." A boy, barely 7, whispered, "I think the stars have names for all of us, but they only use them when we're quiet enough to hear." An old man who had lost his wife spoke only 3 words, "I'm still listening." And in the air between them, something sacred grew. Not a miracle, just a space wide enough to hold everyone. A space that asked nothing, but gave everything. That evening, as dusk folded its golden arms around the trees, Calliope led Liana to the temple again. But this time they did not walk. They sat. They simply sat on the earth beside the fig tree. And slowly, the temple came to them. It shimmered into view, not as stone or pillar, not as arch or altar, but as presence, as closeness, as breath shared without need. They both closed their eyes, and the temple took shape in the silence between their heartbeats. No visions came, no words arrived, just stillness, and in that stillness, everything. Later, as night draped the sky with stars once more, Liana spoke. "I used to think I needed to become something." Calliope waited. "I thought healing meant changing everything about me," she continued. "Fixing, replacing, proving." "And now?" Calliope asked gently. Liana looked up. Now the stars didn't seem distant. They felt reflective, as if she were looking into a sky-shaped mirror. "Now, I think healing is remembering what didn't need to change, what just needed to be met, and loved, and held." Calliope smiled. Her silence was her affirmation. A single firefly drifted between them, and another. And soon the fig tree was filled with soft lanterns of living light. each one a witness, each one a breath. And Liana whispered, not to Calliope, not to the stars, but to the temple within, I'm not waiting anymore. The fig tree rustled, and the wind replied with a hush that felt like arms wrapping around the soul. A few days later, a visitor came to the village. Not someone new, someone returning. A man named Osrin. He had once lived in the village long ago, but left to seek knowledge in far places. He returned with scrolls and studies and words that folded in on themselves like riddles searching for their question. He was kind, but tired. His eyes flickered with light that had burned too long without rest. When he met Liana, he looked past her at first, as if still searching for something larger, grander, more refined. But when she offered him a bowl Elian had shaped for silence, he paused. "What is it?" he asked. She replied softly, "A place for everything you haven't been able to name." He stared into it, and for the first time in many years, he exhaled without needing to prove. He sat, he listened, and the temple welcomed him not with gates, but with stillness. That night, Osrin did not speak of the knowledge he had gained. He asked, instead, about the dreams the children had, and the songs that no one had written, but everyone remembered. And that was how the temple grew again, not in stone, but in another breath. Weeks passed like petals falling from a flower content in its blooming. Liana found herself humming again, tunes she didn't learn, but remembered. She began tending the fire not for warmth, but for company. She taught children how to make story bundles from leaves, wrapping their truths inside and releasing them into the stream. One child asked her, "When do we stop being part of the temple?" Liana knelt and whispered, "When we forget that we are. But even then, the temple waits, not to punish, not to teach, just to welcome." The child smiled, and from the edge of her vision, a lantern flickered into being. Not above, but within the child's chest. It glowed softly, and stayed. On the last night of that season, Liana stood beneath the stars and finally asked the question she had carried since the beginning. What is the sacred temple of Socrates? The wind answered, not with words, but with movement, and in that movement she understood. It was not a place, not a man, not a doctrine. It was the remembering, the patient remembering, that underneath every wound there is a story, and beneath every story there is breath, and within every breath, the temple waits, not to be found, but to be noticed, and in the noticing, it walks with you, forever. And so, the temple breathed again, not as echo, not as myth, but as you, and still. It walks on, gently, endlessly, in silence, with light. The night was more than night. It was a cradle, a breath wrapped around the world. And within that breath, Liana walked slowly through the village that no longer needed names. The fig tree waited quietly behind her cottage, its branches swaying without wind, as if remembering lullabies from before the first dawn. Lanterns floated low tonight, not to guide, not to glow, but simply to keep company. The stars were wide awake, but not in a hurry. Their light was soft, like the final note of a song you hum before sleep. Calliope had already gone to bed. The children were bundled in blankets made of stories. The fire had whispered itself into ash, and still the temple breathed. Not loudly, not grandly, just still, just here. Liana stepped barefoot across the soft moss near the edge of the old garden. The earth was warm, and every step felt like a word in a language only the heart could speak. With each footfall, she remembered something, not from her past, but from the place before memory begins. The stars above shimmered gently, like wise eyes blinking slowly. She was not alone. She was never alone. But tonight she would say goodbye. Not to anyone, just to the story. Because some stories do not end. They simply find their home. She paused by the old well, the one that held no water but offered echoes. Her reflection did not appear on its surface tonight. Instead, the face of her shadow self smiled up at her. The one who had once whispered, "I waited while you forgot." Now she whispered again, "And I walked while you remembered." Liana smiled. Not the smile of a victory, not the smile of a rival, but the smile of someone who had made peace with stillness. She touched the well's stone rim gently and turned. Ahead of her, the forest of memory opened once more. But this time, it wasn't misty. It was golden, like a late afternoon that had learned how to become eternal. She walked through it slowly. The trees didn't whisper her name tonight. They hummed her lullaby. And every leaf that shimmered held a word she no longer needed to carry. Should. Maybe. Not enough. She brushed each one with her fingertips, and they fell. Not down, but upward, rising like dreams released from duty. The temple was waiting at the center, but now it no longer looked like anything. It had no pillars, no breath-shaped walls, no lanterns bearing names. It looked like her own stillness. It looked like sleep. She stepped into it, and the moment she did, she realized she had never left it. The temple had been walking with her this whole time. It was in every moment she paused instead of pressed forward. It was in every time she chose to listen rather than explain. It was in the silence that rose between words and stayed long after they were gone. She moved toward the center, though there were no walls to define it. The center was simply where her heart slowed enough to listen fully. And there it was. The bowl, still empty, still full. She sat beside it and waited. She didn't have to place anything inside this time. Everything had already been given, and the bowl remembered. The temple breathed again. But now she felt it not as something around her, but as her own lungs, her own pulse, her own quiet. Then, from the other side of the temple's silence, came the old presence, Socrates. But tonight, he didn't come as an old man, or a teacher, or a guide. He came as a breeze, as warmth, as the sigh that leaves the body just before sleep begins. And his voice came not through sound, but through the deep peace of understanding. There is no wisdom without rest, no knowing without stillness. You've walked far enough, child. Now, you may simply be. She closed her eyes, and with a soft smile she whispered, "I am." And that was all. No questions followed, no revelations erupted, just a long, deep breath, held, honored, released. When she opened her eyes again, the temple had dissolved into the stars, and she lay beneath her fig tree once more. Calliope sat beside her, quiet as a stone warmed by the sun. Neither of them needed to speak. Their silence was full enough. The wind passed gently, like a friend who didn't want to wake you. And overhead, the stars blinked slowly, their light turning golden as it sank into her skin. The world didn't end. It settled. Liana rose, not to do anything, just to lie down on the mat beneath the tree, wrap herself in her shawl, and feel the ground remembering her weight. Calliope lay beside her, and the fig tree whispered overhead, and the bowl at the temple's center, though far away, though deep within, glowed, not brightly, but like the soul resting into its breath for the first time in forever. Time passed, but not forward. It circled, it folded, it settled into the folds of her sleep. She dreamt of nothing, and that nothing was everything. She dreamt of light that didn't need a source, of silence that didn't need to end, of walking barefoot through fields that had no horizon, only feeling. She dreamt of being carried by her own breath, of being wrapped by the arms of the temple, of being gently told, "Sleep is not a departure, it is the deepest returning." And so she returned. She returned into herself. She returned into the listening, into the slowness, into the gentleness that had always been patient enough to wait. Somewhere, perhaps in the stars, perhaps in the body of the earth, a bell sounded, not to wake, but to bless. The kind of bell that marks the closing of a sacred scroll. The kind that says, "This was holy," even if you forgot. It was always holy. The fig tree rustled one last time. The fireflies rose, and the breath of the night became one with the breath of the dreamers. And Liana, still curled beneath her shawl, still held by earth, still resting inside her own presence, whispered softly in her sleep, "I remember now." And then the dream took her, not away, but deeper into the temple that no longer needed to be walked to, because now it walked within her. So if you, dear listener, find yourself still awake, let this be your breath's lullaby. Let this be the shawl you wrap around your mind. Let this story settle over you like soft moss and starlight. There is nothing left to seek. There is nothing left to prove. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are a sacred temple, walking softly through the garden of now, and it is safe to rest here. The lanterns have been lit. The wind is gentle tonight. And the stars, oh, the stars, they are not waiting for you to become anything more. They are only here to witness you remembering what you already are. So breathe, slowly, fully, tenderly, and let go, for the temple still breathes. And tonight, it breathes with you. Good night, and dream well.